So we are recording now, and I'll go ahead and read our bio. And again, thank you so much, Celeste, for sharing space and sharing your insight and your knowledge and your expertise with us in this class. Our class is Teaching the Power, and it really is about introducing students to the study of different philosophies under ethnic studies, women, gender, sexuality studies, Mexican-American studies, and so forth. And so we're excited to learn from you as you apply these theories in the community here in San Antonio. So thank you so much for your work, and thank you so much for being here. So Celeste Alana Brown is a San Antonio native who is strongly committed to advocating for Black liberation, divesting from policing, and investing in our community. Celeste has been active in the movement for Black lives since 2014. She is passionate about amplifying the voices of local families that have lost loved ones to police violence, and most recently, her work has hit close to home when it impacted her own family the day Darrell Zemault Sr. was murdered by SAPD on September 15, 2020. In her free time, Celeste is a member of the Black Futures Collective and the Defund Police SA Coalition, and by day she works in education policy and advocacy. Prior to working in education, Celeste worked for San Antonio City Council District 2, United States Congressman Lloyd Doggett, and various political campaigns. So her community organizing work is most often done through a policy lens, which I'm so excited for you to share. Please feel free to take the floor, and thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you for the warm introduction. Good morning, everyone. I know it's 10, but I know that's early for some of us. I, first of all, am grateful to share space with you all today. And, I was just talking to Professor Mendoza about how I really wanted to more than anything, like engage in dialogue and first like identify where you all are coming from, right? Like you've been in this course and maybe this is your first course around, the different philosophies that Professor Mendoza mentioned. But I guess I want to understand sort of like based on what you've learned, like sort of where, and this is just like a free question to anybody who wants to answer, right? But like, where have you found yourself having the most questions, or where do you see yourself like wondering how you plug in and get engaged, right? Because I could sit here and talk to you about all the things I've done and, all the spaces I've occupied, but like that means nothing if it's not relevant to like what your questions are or what your learnings have been. And so I'd love to first like start with like, I hate calling it an icebreaker, right? But just like a question around like, when it comes to you finding your power or the things that you've learned about that have frustrated you, like where have your questions been around how to plug in? And anyone can hop in and answer that. And if you're feeling shy, you can use the chat.
One more time, can you say it one more time?
Okay.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Yes, so the question is, right, like based on what you've learned so far, like what questions do you have around engaging, yourself like in this work, or like finding space within a movement to elevate your own voice?
I probably would say like how to get started, I guess. You know what I mean? Like if you find something that you're passionate about and you want to, move forward, like what people would you like talk to, or what people would you kind of get insight, like an insight from before you start, making your moves and really try to do like lay down the groundwork, I would say, and what you're passionate about. So
that's
because you don't want to just move recklessly without even having a plan. So so people can kind of take you serious. Like, what would you? Just so you can see me too. So
kind of like where to start, who to connect with, like how to plug in so you're not moving in silence. Hi. So you're not moving in silence. That's
yeah, most definitely.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm gonna write these down. I'm gonna give, I think Milagros has their hand up. So I'm gonna give room for them to say something, and then I'll kind of like go from there based on like.
All right, cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I think for me, one of the frustrating things, and it's like I had noticed this before had taken this course, but we've talked about it a lot in this course, is how like education in like elementary through high school is so rigid and like doesn't allow students that space to learn about like their own communities, and like they won't really take a course like the course that we're in right now, learning about like POC and like the different aspects of the government and how it's impacted them. Like we don't get a course like that until we're in college, until we're in higher education, and that's even if we pursue higher education.
Mhm.
So I think for me, one question would be like how to get like these sort of conversations out and like make younger people who are like in middle school through high school who like will understand these sort of topics more, how to get them more involved. Just because I wish that I had had more classes like this in high school so I could be more involved by the time I was um at an age where I could vote and where I could go and join protests and all that stuff.
For sure. No, that's a huge point because similarly, right? Like I didn't realize engaging in these spaces was an option until I was in college. And I'll talk about that here in a second as well. Are there any other initial questions that folks have just around like how to plug in? Jimena?
Yes, I have a question. So throughout this course, we have learning about oppression and colonization and how basically we have to be able to adapt to an Anglo system. So my question is, because my goal here is to become a teacher for younger generations, but I would like to also like, I don't know, learn a way to heal, because some of these topics, they can be like taken either like as healing or as a take like something like with hate, you know. But I feel I would like to know how I can approach these topics as a way like, hey, like we're learning this, but this is like the process of healing, yet I don't know how to like to step it up or how like word it, because again, we're talking about little minds that whatever you say can affect them. So I'm like, oh my goodness, like I feel that can impact them in a positive or negative way.
Absolutely. No, I'm so glad that you brought that up too, because I think that's like most pertinent to the work that I'm doing currently. And so I will, because I work for a school system, a public charter school system that where I oversee advocacy. And a lot of what I do is look at how we're like weaving in lessons around like anti-racism and like discussing oppression in ways that like are important. But I think you bring up a good point, right? Where is there space to heal, right? You're learning all of this information that can be super traumatic or triggering, or like, you know, bringing up spaces that like folks don't necessarily want to be in mentally. And so like creating that space is super important. So I'm excited. This is a good start. I will give one last call. Is there anyone else that like has any like existing questions? And mind you, like I'm super clear and aware that like as I talk through some of these questions, more questions may arise. And so I just ask that if you have one, just use the raise your hand feature or pop it in the chat. And like, I'm going to get to as much as possible, because I want to, like, I'm here to be a resource to you, not to sit here and tell you like what I've done and who I am. Like I've mentioned, right? Like I want to be a resource and like help you figure out like tools to get yourself plugged in. So is there anybody else who has an initial one before I go down George and Milagros and Jimena's questions?
I do. I just want to like ask, there are different channels of like finding out. I get lots of happens over the time and over the.
Oh, hold on, Kevin. You're going kind of in and out. I couldn't really hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Barely. You sound super far away.
Barely. Is that better?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I was thinking like different ways of reaching, or we can get the news, because it's like I don't always trust like looking on social media platforms and stuff, and I'm not always looking at the news 24/7 with my notifications on for like News 4, KSAT or whatever, right? And I know a lot of they will not broadcast like problems and issues in society about like racial and gender and all that stuff. So can you give us like other resources that we can use to find out more accurate information of when stuff is going on?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that. Because I have a lot of thoughts around that, right? I think a lot of movement building work has been in many ways in recent years, like shaped through social media. And so I think it's tough sometimes, right? Because you're like, okay, how do I know like that this is legit? And like, where do I plug in? So I think That's helpful. Okay, I feel like we got a few good kind of questions to like start working off of. I feel like I could talk about each of these forever, and we don't have forever, so let's get to it. So the biggest question, right? And like, I thank you, George, for raising it, because I feel like this is a question everybody has and maybe doesn't even know how to ask it, right? Because it comes down to like where to start, where to plug in, right? Like you can learn all of this information about like these horrendous things that are happening or these issues that you become passionate about as you uncover like the different oppressions and like how systems are like further perpetuating that oppression. How do you do anything, right? How do you do anything other than just be upset about it, right? Or after you go to a protest, then what, right? Or after you register to vote, okay, then what, right? And I am of the belief that like electoral politics alone will not save us or dismantle these systems, right? And I say that as someone who has registered thousands of voters in my day, right? As someone who understands the importance of utilizing our voice at the ballot box, but like being clear that like electoral politics will not save us from oppression or from white supremacy as it exists, right? And so with that in mind, I think a lot of people were like, just vote, just make your voice heard. And it's like, okay, cool, then what? And so I guess it's easier for me to first answer the question like of like very literally and tangibly how to plug in and like how to get engaged. And then from there, talk about the various ways that you can plug in that don't necessarily have to look like what you've been taught. So first, right, I would say, and this is where I will share sort of like how I stumbled into community organizing myself, because it was literally stumbling into. I didn't know doing this kind of work was something that was an option for me, right? Like I was never taught this. Like I went to school for public relations. I didn't think that I'd be in the spaces that I am now. And so I'll tell you a bit about my story, and that should kind of help with like how to plug in. So when I was a student at UTSA in undergrad, I'm currently in my graduate program at UTSA, but when I was an undergrad in 2014, when Mike Brown was killed, I remember just being floored, right? He was the same age as my brother. And they left his body there. Sorry, I mean, trigger warning. Obviously, we're going to talk about all of these things in here today. But they left him on the ground for over 5 hours before he was even like covered or like taken away. And like, that shook me to my core. Like when Trayvon Martin was killed, right? I was a senior in high school. So like that jarred me too. But I think it hit even harder once I was in college and started learning about like how literally the United States was designed to like ensure that like people that look like me, like a lot of us in this space, right, like get the short end of most sticks, right? It messed me up in a way that I hadn't seen before. And so at that point, I organized a die-in with NAACP on campus. We did that. And then I was like, okay, cool. Like now what? And so I was just like so angry, and I'm like, this can't be it. Like, yes, like protests are important and we need to like raise awareness, but like, then what? And so from there, I connected with an organization. Y'all probably know them because they come and register voters all the time. Move Texas. Can y'all like nod or thumbs up if you're familiar with Move? Okay. So Move at the time was known as Move San Antonio. They were not Move Texas. It was a little baby organization with 2 people working there. And I connected with someone named Ariel, who was telling me a lot about like the work that they were doing around community organizing. And I was like, what? Like, I think all I had ever heard when it came to organizing was like, I learned about the civil rights movement, which I mean, is that similar for most of y'all, right? Like the extent of your understanding about organizing came from the civil rights movement, the Chicano movement, right? Like the farm workers movement, like that was the great extent of it for me. And so she's like, yeah, we're doing issue education and we are registering people to vote and like showing them like who's on their ballots, like da da da. And like, let's keep it real, right? Like I was raised in a single parent household, west side of San Antonio. Like my mom only voted for president. Like she wasn't voting in these midterm elections, right? Like she wasn't aware of like, she just wasn't aware of like what was happening. And so, and I don't blame her because again, this is all by design, but with that, right, I was just like, oh, like y'all are out here talking about like a lieutenant governor. I don't know what a lieutenant governor is, right? Like I was like literally in such a space of like being like blown away. And like, that's a testament to the failures of the Texas education system for K through 12 education. But also just like the realities of my life. Like a lot of like, you know, I was working 3 jobs when I was at UTSA. I had been working since I was 15. Like I didn't necessarily have time to be plugged in or hip to all of the issues that were pertinent and pressing. But like I got introduced to this organization that was like, hey, we're doing the work and we're seeking volunteers to help us spread the word. And so from there, they had this thing called a voter guide, which they probably have now, which like breaks down like where all the candidates land on things. And they started to ask them questions around policing. And that's where I found the direct link between my anger with Mike Brown and his murder and electoral politics, right? I was like, no, there's a very clear thing here, right? Because if these systems are broken and we keep putting more people into the system that believe it's not broken, we're not going to get a damn thing done. And so from there, like I got this voter guide and I was like, damn, like where's this information been my whole life, right? I took it to the NAACP meeting. I took it to BSU. I took it to my sorority. I took it to the other organizations, and started registering folks to vote. And I'm like, okay, we're angry. Like, look, we can do something. The current person sitting in this seat, believes there's no problem with police accountability. Like we should be voting for the other person. And so I say all that to say as like my little anecdote to say that like the best way to plug in is to find people that are already doing the work. Right. And I know, and that goes further to Kevin's question later, right? About like, how do you know that it's reputable? But like I operate under the belief that there's nothing new under the sun. Organizing is not new. Right. Even talking about defunding the police, though it may be at like the more forefront of things, is not new. Right. Like Dr. Angela Davis and like Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor, people like that have been talking about abolition for a long time. And so with there being nothing new under the sun, and please tell me if I'm talking too quickly, but with there being nothing new under the sun, there are people that care about the same things you care about that are doing this work, whether through formal organizations or just through collectives. Right. And I say that because similarly to how I do not believe that like we will get free from electoral politics alone, we're also not going to get free from nonprofit organizations, right? Like that's not necessarily the answer here. And so like the best thing to do is like if you see somebody that's doing the work or know somebody that's doing the work, like literally ask them to have a conversation and be like, how can I help? How can I plug in? Because I think there's space for all of us within the movement. And I think that in 2021, it's the most accessible it's ever been, right? Because you don't have to necessarily be physically present at marches or at city council meetings or, any sort of formal event, because social media is such a powerful tool in this work too. And so I think like how to start is like, find somebody that's doing what you want to do, that's interested in what you want to do, and shoot your shot, right? Like, either you send them a DM and like ask how to get engaged, or you look at their website and find how to get engaged, or you just ask them to like have a conversation and just say like, where can I plug in? I'm ready to help. Because I think that it seems at first, right, and this is like a problem with movement spaces at current, is like, it can seem inaccessible, or it can seem as though there are like certain like leaders at the helm, and like movements are people driven, period, right? And so like there should not be in any space just like one leader, right? And with that, then that means anybody who you do see as a leader, or who you do see currently doing this work, should have no problem stopping what they're doing to like help you get plugged in and looped into. And like I know it's easier said than done, but I think like the resources are endless and social media makes it helpful, right? And so also too, if you don't see people doing the work that you want to do and don't know where to get started, you can start it yourself as well, right? That's a big thing, right? Black Futures Collective, which is an organization that I'm a part of, like we all came together and created it like a year ago, because like we realized that within San Antonio, there was not like a community driven like mutual aid effort that was focused like solely on like the Black community with like a special focus on like queer and trans folks, right? Like it didn't exist. And so we created it. And then once we created it, people were like, wow, I can't believe we never thought to do this before. But then like more folks like plug in, right? And so I hope that's helpful to like answer like the where to start. Like I know it still seems like a lot to chew, but like I also would like to like offer myself as a resource to any and all of you in like navigating that if you found issues that you care about and want to plug in, because I feel like there are a ton of missed opportunities after protests, right? Like y'all saw after George Floyd, there were like thousands of people at Travis Park in San Antonio. And then when you like get into like the organizing that goes beyond the protest, there's like the same 20, 30, 40 people. And so I think there's like a lot of energy around making change. And I think there does need to be a process of like bettering like what the next steps are so folks can feel like they have the room to engage and plug in. But like you can do it from right where you are. Is that helpful, George?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that sounds good. Because basically it just seems like have to be crazy about it. It seems like it's like a fad. Like people want to, oh yeah, I'm joining a party. I'm a march. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do that. But then when it's time to do like the dirty work and like after the fact, there's really no, you know what I mean? There's people are really not as interested as they were in the beginning when there's like no lights, no cameras, nothing like that, like behind the scenes to kind of to make sure we keeping, these people accountable. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
absolutely.
It's like, so I bet you deal with that a lot in your work. It's like
All the time. All the
yeah,
time.
so well, yeah, that makes sense though.
Yeah, like I think that's why I think, right, it's like there are organizations doing the work and they may be small but mighty, but like if you are like, okay, I don't want to just protest, like that's when you just plug in with them. And it's as easy as shooting a DM or as like going up to them and being like, how do I get engaged, right? Because I will say too, it's not like I think the organizations that are doing the most impactful change work are not going to have like a volunteer now button on their website, right? Like they're like grassroots, they're gritty, they're in the community. And so, yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Of course. Okay. And then, oh my goodness, Milagros' question, I could talk about for my entire life, right? About like how education does not give students the room, the tools, or the knowledge to like talk about or like engage in issues of importance to our communities. And like, I think that especially relates when it comes to, for those of us that are like people of color or Black, Indigenous, or people of color, learning even about our history, right? Or like learning even about like how we're impacted by like systems that are in place. And that is something, right? Like, how can we start these conversations earlier? I think it comes down to where it's hard is I like work like for a school system where like my job is quite literally to make sure these conversations are happening earlier, right? And we have a chief academic officer who is like ensuring our curriculum does not come from a Eurocentric lens and ensures that we're bringing in these conversations around real issues and around like our culture and like and how oppression has like shaped where each of us are within this country, right? And so like I am fortunate to work at a place that is prioritizing that work with the clear understanding that education at large, when it comes to K through 12, does not see that as a priority. And I think the perfect example of that, and y'all may have heard about this, but earlier this year, the Texas state legislature essentially like created a classroom censorship bill, right? To like prohibit and like get in the way of a lot of these conversations. And I think, the thing that I talk to when I speak to folks that are not engaged in policy or like not aware of what the state's doing, I'm just like, think about what our students could possibly be learning that has a bunch of old white men so scared that they want to pass laws to keep us from learning about it. Right. And it's like, I think that there have been efforts by schools to like start having these conversations. There have been efforts by individual teachers to like start these conversations, and the state legislature realized that and like ran with it, right? And oh, thank you so much, Sylvia. That's perfect. But I've taken that and ran with it, right? In the sense that they realized that like we were starting, like students were learning earlier, right? Because of access to information, whether it's because of social media, which largely it is, right? Like I feel like sometimes a lot of like the best news and information I get really does come from Twitter or TikTok. Like it really does. And which is wild to think, because in 2014, like that was not so much the move. But with that, I think that there is a very clear effort to stop those conversations from happening. And like, this is where people power matters, right? Like currently, an organization called IDRA is working to gather parents, teachers, and students that like want to continue to learn about like themselves, their history, oppression, redlining, the list goes on and is endless, that are working to fight against this bill and like hope that this bill doesn't live. Because this is a big topic, right? Like right now is like, okay, so now we currently are in a space where students are learning more about who they are, what oppression looks like, the ways our country was built on white supremacy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that scared the hell out of state legislators. I'm so sorry. Hold on. Told y'all I work for a school. So, but yeah, like it had them scared to where like they've written this bill and like frankly and respectfully and I mean, y'all can report me if you want to, that's fine. Like our school is continuing to operate the way that we were before this legislation was passed, because we're not going to let them stop us from teaching children the truth. But I can say right now, a large majority of school districts do not have somebody like me, right? They don't have a director of advocacy. They don't have somebody who like focuses on doing this work. Like that's not a reality. And so like a goal of mine is to ensure that like more school systems are bringing in people that are ready to like throw the system on its head. George, you have a question?
Yeah, it was just mainly about what you're talking about. I just wanted to get your opinion on it. So basically, I have a friend of a friend who their kid is homeschooled. So, of course, and she's a really like pro education, like telling, teaching their kids the truth about, quote unquote, how now they're saying that slaves were refugees and stuff like that, to kind of cover up the truth. So she was saying that, well, she decided to actually put the kid in school. So this topic came up like in the beginning of the class, like because they're back in school now. So she went ahead and let them go back to school. And he's like, well, my mom said this and this is that. And they were like, the teacher was like appalled, like, what? She was like, yeah. And really bright kid, speaking facts. I think he's like 11, 10, something like that. Real bright kid. And now she was saying, oh, well, we got to have a parent-teacher conference because he's being disruptive. How? Do you see that being a problem with like in the future for kids that are educated, them being, I guess, labeled as unruly or troublemakers because they want to know the truth?
110%. 110%. Like if we're speaking plainly, right? Like we have to acknowledge the truth. And I'm sorry, I hope I'm not like more radical than y'all were ready for, but like we have to acknowledge the truth that like education as a system was built out of white supremacy. It was not built for us from jump. And so with that, like kids have already been getting in trouble for like voicing like their truth from their lived experience, right? And like you look at academia beyond even K through 12, right? And like the prioritization of, sorry. Like you look at the prioritization of quantitative data over qualitative data, right? Like academia as a whole prioritizes what you can research or quantify or read about in a book over lived experience, which is why education continues to fail our children. Because the minute a child comes to a classroom and names something that comes from their very real and very valid lived experience, they're named as a problem child or unruly or talks too much, right? Like that was me. Like, and I still like, my mom did the best she could in teaching me. I didn't know a lot of things about the ways in which like I have been systemically oppressed until I was like 18 or 19, which is horribly embarrassing. But it's a testament to the fact that like the state of Texas in particular does that by design. Like it is absolutely designed to like inhibit civic participation, to inhibit students like calling out the realities of our history. Like, right? Like look at like what we were taught about like, for example, colonization, right? And colonization being a great thing and manifest destiny. And like, we're not talking about the horrific murders and the stealing of land from people and, the brutal like things that happen to indigenous people in this time. Like, so yes, like kids are going to continue to get in trouble for this. Teachers and schools are going to continue to get in trouble for teaching the truth because the state of Texas does not, nor has it ever wanted us to like be engaging in a truthful space, right? Like, it's just what it is. And so, like I said, right, like for me, like I'm gonna keep doing this work. And until TEA or the state of Texas like tries to take me down, like this is gonna continue to happen. But this is why it's so important that like as we gain this information, like whether it's in a classroom setting in academia or through us working in community organizing, we share it with as many people as possible, because we cannot count on a system that was built by white supremacy to teach our children everything they need to know about how white supremacy permeates their daily lives, right? And so like that's where the conversations outside of the classroom are most important. And like it's just what it is, right? Like we cannot, you cannot, what is it? I'm not gonna get the quote wrong, but basically, right, like you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. And so like the sooner we look at like education in its formal sense as a tool of white supremacy, the sooner we realize it's not going to save us, right? I can get all the damn degrees I want. I can go to all the classes I want. And like, that is not, even if I convince my entire hood to go do the same thing with me, that's not what's going to save us. And so like, I name that like, yes, like How do we start these convos earlier? Not in the classroom, or unless you're a radical teacher, or no radical teachers that will start them in the classroom, but they have to start outside of it. You know, you can't put out a fire from inside the house either, right? Like, I think that like literally within the censorship bill, you know, that the professor just put into the chat, right? Like, you'll see they are literally prohibiting any conversations about topics that make white children uncomfortable, right? Like, it says children cannot be made uncomfortable on behalf of their race. They cannot be made to feel guilty for things that have been done by members of their race. And like, it literally, yeah, it scares them. It scares them because if we know our history, then we know how to like stop further oppression from occurring, right? But the bill is so terribly written. I still personally do not believe the bill will stand up in court, like with the lawsuits that major ISDs have made against it, because it's essentially telling our teachers that they can or cannot teach history. And I think it's interesting that the authors of the bill, and I'm keeping this conversation nonpartisan, but the authors of the bill seem to like talk a lot about local control and like not letting the state or the government determine things for people until it comes to, you know, reproductive justice or issues of education, because then they want to be all up in the function. So it's, yeah. Like, the moral story of that question is yeah, the way, how to start these convos earlier, you can't count on the classroom.
And then also to piggyback real quick before you go to the next question, she was like, yeah, and then my son came home and he was like, yeah, the other kids was like, oh wow, they're all interested. Oh wow, I didn't know that, or I nobody taught us that. And then she was like, he said that a teacher was looking at him like, giving him like the eyes of fury or whatever, and whatnot. So I was just like, well, you need to take care of that, because she shouldn't be looking at him like that. So that's something that she's going to address too in their meeting. So I was just like, I'm shocked. I'm really shocked. I'm not shocked, but I mean, it's, you know, it's just, it's sad that this is where we're at. Yeah.
Right.
Still.
My favorite thing to say is shocked but never surprised, right? Like, this is awful that it's still happening, but it's not surprising because it's by design, right? And like, I don't know if that's a grim reality to like share with y'all, or like, it's just what it is, right? Like, these things were designed to like make sure that we didn't know our history, and to make sure that like we weren't aware of like how to make change, right? Like, yeah, it's frustrating, but I think it should give us all the more fuel we need to like plug in where we can and like shake things up. So now I want to go to Jimena's question about like how to both be like learning about oppression and like healing at the same time. Because I think this is like, I feel like if I had an answer, I'd put it in a book and I'd make $1 jillion, right? Like, this is not, I don't think that any person engaged within movement spaces, or any person that is engaged in like, you know, in community like uplift, right, like has mastered this. But like the answer, like the broad answer is community care, right? Is like truly developing systems of community care where like space for healing exists, right? Where we remove ourselves from the notion that we have to constantly be on, or we have to constantly be organizing, or like, and remove ourselves from this notion that like, if I don't speak up, who will? Like, no. Like, again, like movements are not about like an individual person, right? And so like there has to be space for people to step up and step back and give room for like that healing, but like there has to be a sense of community care where you feel safe enough to do that. And so like for both to happen at the same time it's difficult, right? And like I think this is a space where I'll give an anecdote. So my godfather was killed by SAPD roughly over a year ago, in September 15th of last year. And when that happened, like at first, you know, my family had me jump right into like, you know, community organizer Celeste, who was already like getting petitions together to demand body camera footage, was talking to media literally an hour after we found out that he was dead, right? I felt like I was like torn between I have to hop in and like solve all of these issues for us and fight for justice, and like having space to grieve. And like the space to grieve didn't come like until, I mean, I'm there now, right? It's taken like a year, and like I'm there now to where I'm finally giving myself space to grieve, because I thought that I had a responsibility like to my family, but also like as an organizer within the community to like keep going. And that shit almost killed me, right? Like, speaking plainly, like it almost killed me, right? Because I did not get to grieve the loss that happened, or even like be as as present as I'd like to be for my family members and holding space for that grief, because I was just like, how do we get answers? How do we keep going? How do we keep moving? Like, I've learned about this horrific atrocity. Like, how do I plug in? And basically, like, if I sit down or if I say I can't do it, nothing's gonna happen, right? Like this either or thinking, which is rooted in white supremacy, right? It's one of the 15 characteristics of white supremacy is either or thinking things are black or white. I'm a good or bad person. I'm an active or inactive person, blah, 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 right? And so like in that space, I was like, if I step back, like, then what am I doing? Then I'm not honoring Dad's legacy, right? I'm not being a present person doing this work. And it messed me up. Like, and I think so, and I share this to say that like, I'm still figuring out like what healing looks like because of community care, because of being surrounded by people that are doing this work too, that like, we're literally like, Celeste, like sit down, like we got this, like, that's where the space to heal began to exist, right? Is like trusting in the fact that like, the movement like will continue with or without you, and trusting in the fact that like we are humans and like we will be harmed by a lot of the things that we learn as we're doing this work and uncovering this work. But it requires trust, right? It requires trust, the ability to let people be there to help you. And like, really, it requires like a little bit of ego death, right? Like, and like understanding like you are not the end all be all of a movement or of an issue. Like the work is going to continue with or without you. So it's best for you to show up to this work from a space of like giving yourself room to heal, because you can't pour from an empty cup, right? And again, like if I had like a clear answer to like how we heal and fight oppression at the same time, like I'd be wealthy, and because no one has an answer to that, right? And like if you look realistically, and like again, I told y'all this is going to be full of trigger warnings, but I'm going to talk about like suicide and like depression and anxiety for a second. If you like, you could look through the news and see that like Black organizers like have such higher rates of like suicidality or like depression or PTSD or anxiety than others, right? And like I have to remind myself, it is okay to just be Black some days and not have to be an organizer and be the one like fighting everything, because I can't pour from an empty cup. And you know, I didn't get to see, so my godfather was killed September of last year. We didn't get to see body camera footage until February, and it was very limited. And like when I saw the body camera footage is like when I finally broke, right? Like, and it's still like, it's like difficult to talk or think about, because I'm somebody who already deals with like depression and anxiety, and that like gave me a whole new layer of PTSD that I didn't think I'd have, right? Like after seeing a loved one die. And I think you've all watched like, you know, videos of other Black folks that have been killed. Like it's a little different, right? Than when it's someone that's been part of your life, you know, for so long. And I realized then, I was like, I'm not talking to media ever again, right? Like it was when I set a boundary, and like that's when my healing began to start, because I realized that like uplifting Dad's story is important, but it does not have to come at the expense of taking me too. And so like that is where I named that the way healing can happen is like setting boundaries and trusting that the work is going to happen with or without you, and that you can take minutes to breathe, because we cannot all be the freedom fighters 24/7. Like we're human before that. And like existing as an Afro-Latina alone, right, is like an act of revolution. But like, so is self-care, right? Audre Lorde says that, right? Like, and I think that, yeah, I think that like there's not a clear cut and dry answer to this, because it's hard, right? You learn about these things that exist and they impact you, and you will carry them for the rest of your life. And healing has to happen simultaneously, but that means you have to let community be there for you and surround yourself in community. And community can look like one or two friends, right? Like community can look like a whole group of people. Like community looks different for each of us, but like community is what will carry us through that. I hope that was helpful to your question. Yeah. Okay. That was a little deep. Whew. Okay. And then Kevin had a question around like different ways of getting news and like accessing more accurate information. Frankly, right, like, and you mentioned this, right? Like looking at traditional media is not going to be your source of like the most accurate information. The most accurate information will always come from those that are on the ground doing the work, which means that like, it may be tough, but like you want to find those folks that you trust on Twitter or on social media, but Twitter more than anything, right? Twitter is something that's actively utilized by people that are organizing on the ground. And so with that, right, like my advice is like to just follow trusted organizers that have been doing the work, even like from a national level, right? Like I can, I'm trying to think like off the top of my head. I can't right now. But like there are like people that have been leading the work, that have been present doing the work, that like you can follow, that will share information about like what's happening in real time. Because realistically, if my perfect example to give, right, is like, if not for Twitter, like we would not, like there would have been no conviction in George Floyd's case, right? If not for Twitter, we would not have known about Breonna Taylor. If not for Twitter, we would not have, or if not for Facebook, we would not have seen the video of Philando Castile, right? Like the list is endless. Like, so like social media is really our best bet, right? But like, of course, like wait, like I think people always feel like hella pressured to like be the first to say something about an atrocity to show they care. Like wait until you feel like you've gained more information or gathered more information, right? Like that's a natural thing, I think. Like don't just be like, one person tweeted this and like this is fact. But like I would say like when it comes to like disrupting like systems, like that your most accurate news is going to come from people on the ground, even if not from people you follow on Twitter, like also from like freelance journalists, right, that like are writing on blogs or are writing like elsewhere. Like there are some journalists that are getting it right. And you know, I learned this like after dealing with the murder of my godfather, that you know, I realized there were certain reporters I could talk to and certain ones that I couldn't, to make sure like the information that was shared would be accurate. But like that's not something that like most general people that are just trying to find out what's happening in their community are doing. And so I trust you though to like find like trusted folks that like have been doing this work to share news, or to share needs, right? And then to like identify like who the reporters are that have been getting it right, right? Like looking at language that is used by journalists is important, right? Like if they say officer involved shooting, right, officer involved is, I believe, like they came out, the Associated Press came out and was like, that's not accurate reporting, right? So I trust you to like do your own sort of work and seeing like, I don't like the way they reported this, so like this is not a news source that I would like to follow, or like they're reporting this really well and I would. I hope that's helpful. But like, believe it or not, Twitter is like probably arguably one of the best places to get the most accurate information about what's happening on the ground. Not from everybody. I'm not saying like Twitter needs to be your only news source. I'll die before I say that, right? I listen to NPR every morning. Like I be in the news, but still like the best information I get comes from Twitter. Awesome. I love that. Okay. And then so that's all the questions I got, but I wanted to see, are there any other questions like based on what I've said, or anybody just even want to share like where your own thinking is at when it comes to like engaging in this work? Cause it's a lot, right? It's overwhelming, especially when it's like of personal importance to us.
I have a question. You mentioned that you're a grad student, and so I just wanted to hear like, how do you feel like academia and like higher education fits into your work, or if it does at all? I know like a lot of people say like, oh, I would never recommend a PhD, or they would say like, I would never recommend after going through it because it's like so taxing, and that they didn't get out of it what they expected. And so I just wanted to hear like, considering that you are like in your community and also in the like academic higher education space, like how do you feel they coincide with each other, if at all?
Thank you for that question. That's something I'm grappling with because like, let me be honest with y'all, right? Like I started my graduate program in fall of 2019. Obviously 2020, I think radicalized all of us in ways that none of us expected, right? From the global pandemic and the nation's mishandling of it, to the police violence that we saw, and then like when police violence in my own family. And so when I started in 2019, I was going to get my MPA, and like my focus was solely like, because I work in public policy and I realized that I never see people that look like me teaching courses on public policy or like public administration, is that I solely wanted to go to grad school so I could become an adjunct professor and we could see more people that look like us bringing in real experiences like into the space, right? Like I am not that person that's like, I want to do all this research and da 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 da, because if you didn't hear earlier, I have mad beef with quantitative data. Like, I think that like prioritizing quantitative data over qualitative, like, is a tool of white supremacy in itself, and like prohibits us from like identifying all the stories that we should. So, but in 2019, when I started, I was in that headspace. 2020 happened and I was like, why am I even in this program? Like, this is not doing anything for my community. Academia itself is like rooted in like the very things that I'm working to dismantle. Like, it's feeling real ugly. And then of course, like, because of my mental health with everything that happened, I took off a year. I took off from September 2020 to now I'm back. Like, it's my first full semester back. And I'm miserable. Like, and I'm just speaking plainly, and I'm not trying to deter anybody from like going on to get higher education ever, but like, it's not going to save me, right? It's still rooted in meritocracy, right? Having those like letters at the end of my name, like, cool, great, whatever. But so much of the texts that I am required to read are coming from old white men, right? That are like I would not get an MPA. Basically, like, if I could do this differently, like, I would be getting it in something that I want to, right? And I love public policy, and like, but I love dismantling everything about it. And so I would not be in the program that I'm in now. Like, I would prefer to like be in a program that would give me room to like actually do research that would be beneficial to work that's happening in the community, right? And like, to a point, like, can I still? Yes, but like, I wanted my topic to be around like the prioritization of quantitative data over qualitative. And like, I had like tons of examples of like other research around this, like that other like Black and Brown, you know, doctoral students or graduate students have conducted to show like this is a topic worth exploring. And like, I was told no. Right. And I think like that's a common thing for a lot of like Black and Brown people that like go on to get like degrees post-bachelor's, like, is the things that we want to research, like whether it's like your committee or whatever, like they can tell you no. And then you have to go and find something that fits into what they're doing. And it's like, okay, I'm paying you all this money. And I don't even get to research what matters most to me. Right. And so I would just like, where I think they can coincide is like do a program that like, you know, is like rooted in disrupting these systems, like the way that you are. And because public policy is still a white man's game, right? So of course I shouldn't be shocked that I'm reading these texts from 1700, whatever, you know, by these people about like how we craft that. So I would say, and then also like be mindful about where you go, right? Like, and, you know, of course, like I went to UTSA for undergrad. I'm glad to be at UTSA for grad school because like my life is already established here, right? Like I have a career. I bought a home in January. Like, you know, I'm like San Antonio is home, but like if like seeking like graduate level education is something you're into, don't go anywhere that's not going to pay for you to go. Part one, like that's huge, right? Because especially if you are a person of color, you can get that paid for. And then also like really just looking into, right, the department, like who's there, the type of research that they've conducted. Like that's research I didn't do that I should have done. Because then I think that and this is no shade to like the MBA program here, right? Like, like a lot of my professors are great. It just does not align with the work that I do like on the ground. Right. And I think the closest I'm getting, and I hope I get it approved, right, is like now I want to research like the impact of students that are receiving like training and curriculum from an anti-racist lens versus those who are not. So like that will apply directly to my day-to-day work. Like I'm finding a way, but like, I think like academia is not meant for us, and they continue to prove that every day. And that's just the truth, right? And again, I don't want anybody to be like, oh, I left this thing and she's saying don't ever go to grad school. That's not what I'm saying, but like, make sure that you find a program that's going to give you room to like research what you would like to. Like, this is like, it's so important. Because like you can get shut down for things you want to research and then feel sort of defeated. But like, if you do like the research on the front end that I didn't do, right, where it's like, you're looking at like who's in your program, what they research and like how that shows up, then I think it makes a difference. Because yeah, I am not the same me that I was when I came into the program in 2019. And I feel like if you asked me that then, I'd be like, this is great. It's perfect. It's helping with my work with the legislature and blah, blah, blah. But like now I'm like, I don't need a graduate degree to like impact my community. But I do think that like it could potentially help me reach more people depending on like the research that I get to do. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, so I like had to turn my camera on. I was like nodding. I was like, I should probably turn my camera on, but then I was like, not like it's random. Anyways, I'm a public administration major at UTSA, undergrad and women's studies. So like everything you said was really like I related to it because I feel the same way. Like with both majors, it's like two completely different types of professors, like two completely different types of content, and like way two different types of reading. So whenever I was trying to figure out my grad program, I was just like, well, like I feel like stuck between the two types of like discourses that I was learning. But everything you said really spoke to me and I appreciated it.
Oh, yay. Good. And I hope you get your graduate degree in women's studies. That's what I hope. For sure. Awesome. Are there any other thoughts or questions? Is this helpful? Like, has this been a helpful space to engage in, y'all? Okay. I feel like I've talked so much.
It's been so amazing. And I'm curious about your involvement with like the city. Like, can you speak a little bit about like what moved you to work with the city? Any reflections on doing so? As I get older, when I was younger, I was like, I don't want to mess with any, like, that's not my lane. I don't want to mess with politics stuff, local, city, whatever, you know? But now that I'm getting older, I'm like, oh, wow, I really do have to like go to these office hours that my district council person has.
Yes.
And I know that you're very, very active in that. Although I appreciate you starting your presentation by saying you don't believe it's going to save us, right? Which is true. Like the system that's set up for us to be in the positions we are on purpose. But that doesn't mean we don't, you know, can still not have involvement in that and in other things as well. So I was curious if you could say a little bit more about that for my own interest too, because I'm just like, I don't want to, but I do have to learn this city stuff and be aware and involved in some way.
110%. And so I think, right, so like for me, I started out back in 2014 going to city council and like going off on city council and the mayor, right? Like that was like my lane. And then I ended up working for city council because at this point in my, like, again, my journey has been interesting, right? And like most people, like I started out like as a like reformist and thought like you could reform systems that exist and that like things could get better for us because I was young and didn't know better, right? Like when we know better, we do better. And so even though I was going off on city council back then, I knew I was like, well, I want to eventually run for city council, right? Like I should be in this seat and I should do this thing. But before I do that, I need to work for city council. And so I was like building out my whole little career trajectory as like, okay, I will work for Move because I didn't tell y'all this, but I ended up working for Move after I was volunteering for them. And so I worked for Move San Antonio for 2 years and then went to work on some political campaigns. And then I was like, okay, like I've studied how people get elected into office and it helps a lot when they have experience having already worked for the city. So I met William Cruz Shaw, who became the District 2 council person for the east side of San Antonio. And he's like, I want you on my team. And I was like, this is perfect. And he's like, you know, I really want to like create space to like I identify like who comes next after me, because basically all the rich districts in San Antonio do that, right? Like they will identify, name, and endorse the person that will run for office after them. And that allows continuity of policy ideas and like movement that the east side of San Antonio has frankly never had, right? Like we've never had that sort of consistency or continuity of like policy. And so I say, right, each council person is elected for 2 years and it takes a year alone for them just to find the damn bathrooms and meeting rooms, right? And so there's not much you can accomplish within a 2-year term, even though I will say Jalen McKee Rodriguez and Terry Castillo are very much so challenging that and kicking ass right now. So I'll name that. So I went to work for city council and I realized then like how much bureaucratic red tape keeps anything meaningful from ever happening. And like after working for city council, I was like, I will never run for this seat because until we have a council that is made up fully of people that believe in like the policy ideals that I do, like we're not going to make change, right? Like we have a city manager strong government, meaning that like the city manager and city departments like can largely do what they want to do like without council approval, right? Or without mayor approval. And so, you know, with that, I think working within there, I was like, I don't want to do this. Like I can make more impactful change being on the outside, like being somebody that's coming and like telling them about themselves and like bringing data and bringing like proof behind like why these things don't work. Because I think I realized within that bureaucracy, a lot of city council and the mayor have this need or desire to align with the city manager's goals, right? To them, that's what makes them seem like a good policymaker. When I'm sorry, if you were elected by me and my community, you should be uplifting what matters most to us, right? And like, which is where I bring up Terry Castillo for District 5 and Jalen McKee Rodriguez, because they are the two council people, the two most progressive we've ever had, and are actually like, yeah, it's cool that the city manager and the mayor have this plan, and like, we not with that, right? Like, and so anyways, like all in all, I left city council. I was like, I'm never running for that office. I would much rather like continue to raise hell from outside. And then in 2020, right after George Floyd, I went and spoke before city council, and like I went off, y'all, like the most I've ever gone off. Like, because in the years before when I went off, I was like, you know, I still want to run for office. I got to be respectful. I was like, nah, forget all that respectability shit. Excuse my language. I didn't even ask if I could cuss, but forget all that respectability shit. Like, you are hurting our community and like trying to pass these resolutions that mean nothing or do not address the real issues at hand to make it seem like you give a damn, right? Like the city of San Antonio calls itself the most progressive city council we've ever had, blah, blah, blah. But when it comes to like actual tangible change that impacts Black, Brown, or Indigenous communities, they're not delivering, right? And so engaging with city council is one of the most, hold on. Okay, sorry. But I think like engaging with your city council members is one of the most important things you can do, because they don't have power, but you do, right? Like the power is within the people, the power is within the constituents. And like, as constituents rise up and they're like, hey, like constituents are why you're in the seat, and constituents can be how you lose it too, right? Which is exactly what happened in District 2, right? Like the citizens and residents were not happy with how Councilwoman Jada Andrews Sullivan was operating. And so as an incumbent, she lost to the first openly gay Black man and a UTSA alum at that, y'all. And he won in that seat, right? And so like, that's where it's like you engaging in the city process means everything, because they approve the police budget, which, by the way, housing, healthcare, and human services combined get $15.9 million a year from the city. Can anybody tell me how much SAPD gets? You can even just guess.
Can you say it again? Housing, healthcare, and what?
Housing, healthcare, and human services. Okay, Kevin guessed 40 mil, 20. Lillian said 55 or 60. $489 million. So, and this is last year's budget. So not even this year's. This year's they got more than 500. But last year, right, in the middle of a global pandemic, when people were at risk of losing housing, when people needed healthcare support, and when people needed support for human services, education, right? We were doing virtual learning, et cetera. They got $15.9 million, and SAPD got $489 million. And that alone should be enough for you to start engaging with city council and going and cussing these people out yourself. Because what? Because what? Like the math simply does not add up. And they will try to say, oh, well, the citizens wanted this. It's like, no, we didn't. But guess what? Citizens that do want to see increased police funding show up to go speak at these meetings. They show up to fill out city surveys. And so then they're considered to be the representatives of all that we do. And so engaging in the city is like one of the most important things y'all could do. That is like my point with that. That's my mic drop for that.
And can you also tell us a little bit more about Black Futures Collective? Anything you have planning coming up, or just where you're at with the organization?
Yeah. Okay. So Black Futures Collective, right? Like we focus primarily on like mutual aid for like other Black folks with like a focus on like queer and trans folks. And so right now, like we're kind of in like a recess period. and not really a recess, but like we're taking a minute to breathe, right? Because Black folks deserve rest. And so with that, like we're trying to identify as we come upon the holidays, like some mutual aid efforts that we can engage in, and space to plug in there. And sorry. Some spaces to plug in there. And also like there's room for like, there's room that if you know like Black folks that are in need of mutual aid support, you can nominate them, and like we basically like collect funds from the community and like give without any sort of means testing, right? Like our only care is that like you are Black and you have a need, right? And of course, like with prioritization, like given to queer and trans folks. But like we do that, but there are also like other organizations that help with mutual aid at large, right? Like just not for Black folks, right? Like the Yanawana Herbolarios are a big organization that like lead that work, and also like give natural medicine to folks that are like navigating COVID. I had COVID in December and I don't know what they gave me, but I made it out. But like there are like, so we partner with other like community care organizations too in doing that work. But like right now we don't have like any like big project coming up because we're really just trying to like reset and recalibrate after the trauma that we've seen in the past year.
Thank you so much. Any other questions or comments or reflections?
Really appreciate you for coming in. You had some real good insights and kind of open up the eyes on, I mean, not just for me, but I'm pretty sure the rest of the class on certain issues that are out in our very own city, you know, that we should, you know, voice our opinion on. You know, sometimes like being a minority, you feel like, whatever. I mean, it's gonna be the same outcome, or whatever. They're not gonna listen to me. It's just me. So just to have that encouragement to kind of like, hey, don't worry about that. You know, if it just takes really one, you know, one shows up and you spread the word, two will show up, and hopefully if everybody got the same views, eventually change will happen. So that's the way I'm feeling based off of what you know, talked about and all your encouragement. So appreciate that.
For sure.
Are you also okay with folks following you on Twitter? I was going to share you.
Yes.
But I wasn't sure if that's okay.
Go for it. Y'all can follow me on Twitter. That's the easiest place to reach me. But I'll tell y'all right now, I'm not always just tweeting about movement stuff. I'm 27.
A full person.
I still get to be young. I'm a full person. But yes, follow me.
That's important to say. And that's something I learned later too, like in grad school, that I can use social media like strategically, right? Like it doesn't have to be something that I just consume like mindlessly. I can have a section for like mutual aid, community care, self-care,
right.
Stuff that will make me feel good. But it took me a while. Before that, I was just using it for hood rat stuff. But
exactly.
Yeah, you can use it absolutely to make yourself feel connected. And I do know from the San Antonio mutual aid folks, there is very much, I don't know if you want to speak about this on your last point, but do you want to talk about sort of not just like the social media, like connections between mutual aid, but sort of like the relationships, like I don't know Denise Hernandez, but from following you, I kind of learned about your growing like beautiful friendship and solidarity. So I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to that as our last point, and then I know it's already over an hour.
Yeah, no, I would love that. Yes, I think, right, like you find community through doing this work, right? And so like Denise Hernandez is a good example. She works for Jalen McKee Rodriguez, the District 2 council person, one of the ones that we don't need to cuss out. And her and I, you know, she developed like this Plants for Mutual Aid effort where like people would donate like plant clippings to her and she would sell them and donate to mutual aid. And her and I also then realized like, hey, between you and I and like our like Twitter and Instagram and TikTok following, like we have room to like help crowdsource like when people have emergencies too. And so we started doing that too, right? Like we'd use the Plants for Mutual Aid, like Venmo, to like collect, but like also to like help, like we just helped, you know, a Black woman that like needed rent assistance, like whatever. And again, we do this no questions asked because like real community care is not like rooted in means testing, but yeah. And like, she's become like one of my favorite people in the world, right? Because I think like when you like surround yourself with people that like care for others in the way that like you aspire to, like you develop relationships that like sustain beyond just movement spaces, right? And like, that's the goal, is to actually be in relationship with the people you're organizing with. And I think it's the most beautiful part of this work.
Absolutely. I'm so grateful for you sharing your energy, your insight, your knowledge, your expertise, for engaging in a dialogue with us and our learning community. Thank you so much. Any other final questions or comments before? I'm sharing the Plans for Mutual Aid and your Twitter in here so folks can start following Strategic.
Yay. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'll see y'all on these Twitter streets. I appreciate you for having me as well. Like, it's been awesome.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful.
Yay. Okay, I'll see y'all.
Right. Take care. Bye. All right, y'all. I'm so hyped with that. I love that. Any comments or questions or anything? Okay.
She is amazing, is what I can say. And I love she doesn't have a filter. Like, she just says like things without saying like any like making some points or anything. She just goes for it. So I love that.
And I love that she's in the education and education policy space, because we do need folks like that, right, in those spaces. I know for teachers, some of the biggest problem is the administration. They don't support you. If you do want to do something behind closed doors, or you have to do it behind closed doors, right? Like teaching radical content to your students.